My name is Victoria and Hartwell. I'm 29 years old, and exactly 47 minutes after my mother sent me a group text uninviting me from Christmas dinner, I made a phone call that would change everything. We're keeping it small this year, the message read, sent at 11:23 a.m. on December 18th. Just immediate family. You understand. What they didn't understand was that the exclusive reservation they'd made at Belmont's, the upscale restaurant where they planned to celebrate without me, was owned by the man they'd never bothered to meet. My husband of 3 years, Daniel. You've been disinvited? Daniel asked when I showed him the message, his voice carrying that particular calm that always preceded his most strategic decisions. His dark brown eyes scanned the text message on my phone screen, reading each word carefully as if looking for some hidden meaning that might soften the blow. Apparently, I'm not immediate family anymore, I replied, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice and failing completely. My hands trembled slightly as I held the phone, the screen still glowing with those devastating words. Then let's give them a Christmas dinner they'll never forget, he said, that familiar spark of protective fury lighting up his eyes. He set down the chef's knife he'd been using to prep vegetables for our own modest dinner and turned to face me fully. I think it's time your family learned exactly who they've been dismissing for the past 5 years. Before I explain what happened next, let me know where you're viewing from and hit subscribe if you've ever been excluded by the very people who should love you unconditionally. This is a story about boundaries, self-worth, and what happens when the people who should protect you become the ones you need protection from. The thing about being the family disappointment is that you learn to read the signs early. You become attuned to the subtle shifts in conversation when you enter a room, the way eyes slide past you to land on someone more interesting, more accomplished, more worthy of attention. You memorize the particular tone of voice that means you're being tolerated rather than welcomed. And eventually, if you're not careful, you start to believe that maybe they're right. Maybe you really aren't enough. My older brother Christopher had always been the golden child. Harvard Law School, full scholarship, graduated summa cum laude. By 32, he'd made partner at father's prestigious law firm, Hartwell and Associates, a position that had been carefully groomed for him since he was old enough to understand what a partnership meant. He married Amanda Sinclair Whitmore, whose family name was old enough to be engraved on buildings throughout Boston. Amanda spoke 3 languages fluently, had a master's degree from Oxford, and knew exactly which fork to use at formal dinners. She was everything my parents had dreamed their children would marry. My younger sister Isabel played the role of artistic free spirit perfectly, her gallery openings in Soho giving our parents just enough sophisticated bohemian credibility to discuss at their country club dinners. Our daughter is an artist, my mother would say with carefully practiced pride, pronouncing the word as if it were something exotic and interesting. Isabel's paintings sold for thousands of dollars to collectors who appreciated her raw exploration of feminine identity in late-stage capitalism, or whatever the current art world buzzwords happened to be. She dated musicians and poets and occasionally a trust fund kid slumming it in Brooklyn, and our parents tolerated it all because it made them seem open-minded and cultured. And then there was me. Victoria. The middle child who chose teaching over corporate law, who married for love instead of social advancement, who committed the unforgivable sin of being genuinely happy with a life my parents considered beneath our family standards. I taught American literature at a private preparatory school in Queens, helping teenagers discover Fitzgerald and Steinbeck while grading papers until midnight most weeknights. I drove a sensible Honda Civic that I'd bought used. I shopped at Target instead of Bergdorf Goodman. And I'd fallen in love with a man who'd built his success from absolutely nothing, without the benefit of family connections or an Ivy League pedigree. To really understand why that December 18th text message was the final straw, you'd have to go back 5 years to the night I first brought Daniel home to meet my family. We'd been dating for 8 months, and I was genuinely excited to introduce them to the man I loved. I told them all about him. How he'd started as a line cook at 16 to help support his single mother and younger sister, how he'd worked his way through community college taking night classes while working double shifts, how by 27 he'd saved enough to buy his first restaurant. I thought they'd be impressed by his work ethic, his determination, his success against all odds. Daniel had started as a dishwasher at a neighborhood Italian place in the Bronx, working after school to help with family bills. The head chef there, a gruff old Italian immigrant named Salvatore, had seen something in the skinny teenager who stayed late to watch the line cooks work. Sal started teaching him, first the basics of knife skills, then sauces, then the intricate dance of running a professional kitchen during dinner service. By 18, Daniel was running the line on Friday nights. By 22, he was sous chef. By 27, he'd saved enough, every penny he could spare for nearly a decade, to purchase a failing neighborhood bistro and transform it into something special. The first restaurant, a farm-to-table place he called Harvest, had been his life's dream realized through pure determination. He'd spent months developing relationships with local farmers in upstate New York, creating a seasonal menu that changed based on what was fresh and available. Food critics had noticed. Within 2 years, Harvest had a Michelin star recommendation and a 6-week waiting list for reservations. By the time I met him, he owned 3 successful restaurants and was scouting locations for a 4th. I dressed carefully for that first family dinner, choosing a conservative navy dress that I hoped would signal respect for the occasion. Daniel had worn his best suit, not designer, bought off the rack at Men's Warehouse, but well-fitted and appropriate. He'd been nervous in the car, running his hands through his dark hair, a gesture I'd learned meant he was trying to calm himself. "They're going to love you," I'd assured him, squeezing his hand as we pulled into my parents' circular driveway in Greenwich, Connecticut. "Just be yourself." The house looked precisely as it always did, imposing, perfectly maintained, with carefully manicured hedges and not a single leaf out of place on the expansive lawn. The white columns framing the entrance reminded me of a museum, cold and untouchable. Even as a child, I'd always felt like I was entering a building rather than coming home. "So you're in the restaurant business," my father, Richard Hartwell III, had said during that disastrous first dinner, the words dripping with barely concealed disdain. He didn't even look up from his perfectly cooked filet mignon, continuing to cut his meat with a surgical precision he brought to everything in life. The Waterford crystal wine glasses caught the light from the antique chandelier overhead, sending small rainbows dancing across the white tablecloth. She'd worn vintage Yves Saint Laurent and had taken artfully filtered photos throughout the reception, posting them on Instagram with captions about supporting family choices and celebrating love in all its forms. The language suggested open-mindedness while somehow still implying that my choice was alternative, different, something that required special support rather than simple happiness. She spent most of the reception on her phone, responding to comments from her followers, occasionally looking up to smile vaguely in my direction. My best friend from college, Lauren Matthews, had seen it all clearly. She'd been my roommate at Columbia, where I'd gotten my teaching degree while she pursued journalism. We'd stayed close through the years, meeting for wine nights at her apartment in Park Slope, and she'd watched my family dynamics with increasingly less patience. "They're punishing you," she'd said at the reception, watching my mother's side of the venue remain conspicuously sparse while Daniel's family filled the dance floor, laughing and celebrating. Lauren held a glass of champagne, the good stuff, because Daniel had insisted on at least having excellent wine at our wedding, and her green eyes were sharp with anger on my behalf. "For choosing happiness over their approval. You know that, right?" "Maybe they'll warm up once they get to know Daniel better," I'd said, still hoping despite all evidence to the contrary. "Once they see how successful his restaurants are, once they see how good we are together." Lauren had just shaken her head sadly, her red hair catching the soft lighting of the restaurant's event space. "Sweetheart, some people are simply incapable of being happy for others. Even their own daughter. Especially their own daughter, if it means admitting they were wrong about something." She was right, of course. Over the next 3 years, the pattern became impossible to ignore, a deliberate and systematic exclusion that would have been almost impressive in its consistency if it hadn't been so deeply painful. Christmas 2020, the first Christmas after our wedding, they'd invited Christopher, Amanda, Isabel, and her boyfriend of 3 months, a musician named Trevor who wore exclusively black and had strong opinions about the commercial corruption of punk rock, to their annual holiday party. Daniel and I received a card in the mail, postmarked December 23rd, arriving the day after the party had already happened. Thought it best to keep it simple this year. My mother had written in her perfect cursive, the handwriting she'd learned from Catholic school nuns in the 1970s. Hope you two had a lovely holiday season. Easter 2021. Family brunch at the country club where my father had been a member for 40 years, a sprawling establishment with tennis courts and a golf course and a dress code posted at the entrance. When I'd called to ask about details, my mother had explained with patient condescension, "It's members and immediate family only, darling. You understand. The club is very strict about their guest policies." "Daniel is immediate family," I'd pointed out, my voice tight. "He's my husband. Legally, actually, literally my immediate family." "You know what we mean, Victoria. Don't make this difficult." Her tone suggested I was being deliberately obtuse, purposefully misunderstanding a simple situation. "Christopher is bringing Amanda, but she's a legacy member through her family. Isabel will be bringing Trevor, but he's been vetted through the guest committee. It's just complicated with Daniel. Perhaps next year." Next year never came, of course. There was always a reason, always an excuse. The club had policies. The restaurant had a maximum capacity. The venue was members only. The event was just for the immediate family, a phrase that apparently had a very flexible definition that contracted or expanded based on who they wanted to include. Thanksgiving 2021 marked a turning point, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Christopher hosted at his brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, a 4-story masterpiece he and Amanda had purchased for $3.8 million and spent another $700,000 renovating. The invitation, delivered via my mother as though she were a diplomatic courier handling sensitive documents, specifically mentioned, "family only." "What does that mean, Mom?" I'd asked on the phone, already knowing the answer but needing to hear her say it explicitly. "Daniel is family. Christopher's space is limited," she'd explained, her voice taking on that reasonable tone that always preceded something deeply unreasonable. "He can only accommodate so many people comfortably. You're welcome to come, of course. We'd love to see you. But not my husband." "Victoria, please don't turn this into a situation. Christopher is trying to host a nice family Thanksgiving. He's under a lot of stress at work. Can't you just come by yourself this one time?" That's when something inside me finally cracked, not completely broken, not yet, but the first deep fissure in whatever foundation of hope I'd been standing on. "No," I'd said simply. "I can't. If Daniel isn't welcome, neither am I." The silence on the other end of the phone had been long enough that I'd checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, my mother had sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "You're choosing him over your own family," she'd said, making it sound like a diagnosis rather than an observation. "He is my family," I'd replied. "That's what marriage means. That's what it's supposed to mean." "Well, don't expect us to enable this phase you're going through," Christopher had said when he called me later that day, his voice sharp with irritation. "We're trying to maintain some semblance of family traditions, and you're making everything about your point." "About him? My point?" I'd repeated, incredulous. "My point is that I'm married. That's not a phase, Christopher. That's my life. Whatever you need to tell yourself, Vicky." The click of him hanging up had been final, decisive. I'd stopped going to events without Daniel after that. If my husband wasn't welcome, neither was I. This decision led to a year of strained phone calls and guilt-laden text messages that seemed designed to make me feel like I was the one causing problems rather than simply responding to their deliberate exclusions. "You're being stubborn," my mother would say during our increasingly rare phone conversations. "You're putting your pride before your family." "I'm putting my marriage first," I'd correct her each time. "The way you're supposed to." My best friend Lauren saw the situation more clearly than I did, with a perspective that comes from not being emotionally entangled in dysfunction. We'd meet for wine at her apartment in Park Slope, and she'd listen to my latest report of family rejection with increasing frustration. "They're gaslighting you, Vic," she'd said during one particularly difficult conversation, pouring us each another glass of Pinot Grigio, making you feel like you're the problem when they're the ones systematically excluding your husband from family events. That's textbook emotional manipulation. They're family, I would respond weakly, the justification sounding weaker each time. What am I supposed to do? Cut them off completely? Lauren would shake her head, her green eyes serious. I'm not saying cut them off. I'm saying recognize what they're doing. Stop making excuses for behavior that wouldn't be acceptable from strangers. Blood relation doesn't give them a free pass to treat you like garbage. But acknowledging the truth meant confronting a painful reality, that the people who should love me unconditionally had made their love very, very conditional indeed. And I wasn't ready to face that, not yet. The financial dimension of their disapproval revealed itself slowly, like a deliberately pulled thread unraveling a sweater. My grandfather, Harold Hartwell, my father's father, had established trust funds for all three of his grandchildren decades earlier. The trusts were substantial, each containing approximately $250,000 to be distributed when we turned 30. It was meant to provide a foundation for building our adult lives, a head start that Grandfather Harold hoped would give us freedom to pursue meaningful work rather than just lucrative careers. When I'd turned 30 in March, I'd been expecting the distribution. I'd even made plans with Daniel for how we might use it, perhaps a down payment on a small house in Queens, or an investment in his newest restaurant venture, or simply a safety net that would allow me to take some professional risks, maybe pursue my long-held dream of writing a novel. The money represented possibility, freedom, the kind of security that lets you breathe a little easier at night. Instead, I'd gotten a phone call from my mother, delivered in that particular tone she reserved for delivering tragic diagnoses or explaining why I couldn't have what I wanted. Your father and I have been discussing your trust fund distribution with the estate lawyers, she'd begun, her voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone about to deny a request. Given your current life choices and financial instability, we have some concerns. I'm not financially unstable, I'd interrupted, setting down the coffee I'd been drinking. My hand was steady, but my heart had started racing with a knowing dread. I have a steady teaching salary with benefits. Daniel's restaurants are thriving. He just opened his 4th location last month. We're doing fine. Restaurants are risky ventures, Victoria. My mother's voice took on a lecturing quality, as if she were explaining something obvious to a child. The failure rate is astronomical. Something like 60% in the first year, 80% within 5 years. We're simply concerned about protecting your inheritance from poor investment decisions. What if Daniel's business fails? What if you invest in one of his ventures and lose everything? The implication was crystal clear. My husband was a bad investment, a risk, someone who couldn't be trusted with family money. Never mind that Daniel had built 4 successful restaurants from nothing, that he had a Michelin recommendation, that his financial acumen had turned failing establishments into thriving businesses. In their eyes, he would always be the high school dropout from the Bronx who wasn't good enough for their daughter. This is punishment, I'd said flatly, abandoning any pretense of polite conversation. Because I married Daniel. Christopher got his trust fund at 30, no questions asked. Isabel will get hers in 6 months when she turns 30. But mine is being withheld because you don't approve of my husband. This is protection, my mother had corrected, her voice firm. Someday, when you're older and perhaps wiser about these matters, you'll thank us for safeguarding your future. I'd hung up on her, something I'd never done before. My hands were shaking with anger and hurt as I'd immediately called our family attorney, or rather, tried to. The attorney, Martin Cooperman, had worked with my family for decades. His secretary informed me that Mr. Cooperman couldn't speak with me about the trust due to a conflict of interest. He represented the trustee, my father, not the beneficiary. So I'd hired my own lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca Chen who specialized in trust and estate law. She'd reviewed the trust documents and delivered the bad news over coffee at her Midtown office. Your grandfather's trust language includes a clause allowing the trustee, in this case, your father, broad discretion in timing distributions if he deems the beneficiary not yet prepared for responsible financial management. She'd pushed the relevant page across her glass desk toward me, the legal language highlighted in yellow. It's unusual, but not illegal. Your father has significant latitude here. So he can just hold my money hostage indefinitely? I'd asked, the coffee turning sour in my stomach. Potentially, yes. You could challenge it in court, argue that his discretion is being exercised in bad faith, but trust litigation is expensive and time-consuming. We'd be looking at $30,000 to $50,000 in legal fees, minimum, and there's no guarantee of success. I'd spent $7,847 on Rebecca's initial consultation and research before deciding to walk away. Daniel had wanted to fight it harder, to push back legally, to make my father answer for using money as leverage and control. We can afford the legal fees, he'd argued, his jaw tight with anger on my behalf. We can fight this. Vic, don't let them get away with it. Let them keep the money, I'd said, exhausted by the whole situation. I don't want anything from them anymore. I don't want to spend the next 2 years in court fighting my own father over money while they paint me as greedy and vindictive to everyone we know. But even as I'd said it, even as I'd walked away from the fight, it still hurt. Every holiday that passed without an invitation stung. Every family photo posted on social media that didn't include us felt like a deliberate erasure. Every milestone celebrated without acknowledgement, our first anniversary, Daniel's restaurant winning a prestigious culinary award from the James Beard Foundation, my promotion to department head at the private school where I taught, reinforced the message that I didn't matter, that my life and choices were somehow less valuable than Christopher's corporate success or Isabel's artistic acclaim. The final build-up to that December 18th text had been particularly cruel, a master class in emotional manipulation that I didn't recognize until I was standing in the wreckage of it. 3 weeks before Christmas, my mother had called with what seemed like an olive branch, her voice warm and friendly in a way it hadn't been in months. We're having a discussion about holiday plans, she'd said. Your father wants to do something special this year, something different. We're thinking of doing a nice dinner out instead of hosting at home. More elegant, less stressful. That sounds lovely, I'd said carefully, hope flickering despite my better judgment. Maybe this was finally the change I'd been waiting for. Maybe they were ready to include us, to acknowledge my marriage, to move forward. Daniel and I could meet you wherever you decide. He's been researching some amazing restaurants. There's a new place in Tribeca that just got 3 stars from the Times. Actually, Catherine and I were thinking it might be nice to keep it more intimate this year. Just the core family unit. My father's voice had come through the phone, apparently on speaker, that authoritative tone that expected agreement rather than discussion. More meaningful conversation, you understand. And Daniel and I aren't part of that? The question had come out quieter than I'd intended, the hope extinguishing as quickly as it had sparked. You're always welcome, Victoria. Of course you are, sweetheart. My mother's voice dripped with false sweetness. But you understand that bringing Daniel creates a certain tension. There are still some hurt feelings about the trust fund situation, and your father has very particular ideas about proper family gatherings. It might be better to keep things simple this year, just until things settle down a bit. The trust fund situation. As if I were the one who'd created that problem rather than being the victim of it. As if my father's decision to withhold my inheritance because I'd married the wrong kind of person was somehow my fault for not being appropriately grateful for the financial manipulation. I see. I'd managed, my throat tight. I'll think about it. That's all we ask, darling. Just think about it. We love you, you know. We just want what's best for everyone. But I hadn't needed to think about it. The decision had been made for me on December 18th at 11:23 a.m. when the group text arrived, the family thread that included Christopher, Isabel, Mom, and Dad, but notably not me until that message. The thread had been buzzing all morning with excited discussion about the reservation at Belmont's, the seven-course tasting menu that would start with oysters and champagne, the wine pairings that the sommelier had personally selected, the special amuse-bouche the chef was preparing exclusively for their table. And then, buried in the middle of the enthusiastic planning like a knife between the ribs, keeping it small this year. Just immediate family. You understand. Not even addressed to me directly, just tossed into the group chat like they were announcing they'd be serving white wine instead of red. They hadn't even done me the courtesy of a private message, of an explanation, of anything that acknowledged this was a significant decision that deserved more than a casual notification. Just a throwaway line in a group chat, as if they were discussing the weather or commenting on traffic. I'd stared at that message for a full 5 minutes, sitting in my classroom during my lunch break, surrounded by stacks of ungraded essays on The Great Gatsby, and the coffee I'd been drinking gone cold in my hand. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed slightly, a sound I usually tuned out but which suddenly seemed deafening. Around me, the empty desks of my students sat in neat rows, and I'd had the strange thought that this was appropriate somehow, surrounded by emptiness, by absence, by the echo of voices that had moved on to other rooms. Lauren had been furious when I'd called her from my car after school, sitting in the parking lot because I couldn't face driving yet. "This is beyond cruel, Vic," she'd said, her voice tight with anger. "This is calculated. This is them sending you a message that you don't matter, that your marriage doesn't matter, that you can be erased from the family whenever it's convenient for them." "I know," I'd said, surprised by how calm I felt. Not numb. That would imply an absence of feeling. This was different. This was clarity, the kind that comes when something you've been avoiding finally becomes impossible to ignore. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to call my husband," I'd replied, starting my car. "And then I'm going to stop trying to earn love from people determined to withhold it." That phone call to Daniel lasted exactly 47 minutes, though it felt both longer and shorter than that. We sat at our small kitchen table in our apartment in Astoria, a one-bedroom place that was modest by Manhattan standards but felt like home in ways my parents' Greenwich mansion never had, and we planned. Every detail, every strategic decision, every moment of what would come next. Daniel made 3 calls that night while I sat beside him, listening, my hand in his. The first was to his restaurant manager at Belmont's. Yes, the same Belmont's where my family had made their exclusive reservation. Daniel had purchased it 6 months earlier, his 4th acquisition, transforming a struggling fine dining establishment into one of the most sought-after reservations in the city. My family had never bothered to learn this detail about his expanding empire, had never asked which restaurants he owned or where they were located or anything that would have required genuine interest in his professional life. "Marcus, I need you to pull up a reservation for me," Daniel had said into the phone, his voice calm and professional. "December 25th. Party of 5 under the name Hartwell." A pause while Marcus searched the system. "Yes, that's the one. 7 p.m. Chef's table in the private alcove. 7-course tasting menu with wine pairings. Total prepaid, $2,387. Another pause. "I'm going to be handling that table personally." "Yes, personally. I'll explain everything tomorrow, but for now, just make sure everything is absolutely perfect for them. Best china, best crystal, premium wine selections. I want them to have an unforgettable experience." The second call was to his head chef, Marcus Liu, an incredibly talented culinary artist who'd worked at Per Se before Daniel had lured him away with creative freedom and an equity stake. "Marcus, that private party on Christmas, the Hartwells, I need you to prepare it as if the Michelin inspectors are in the room. Every course perfect. Every flavor profile exact. This is important." He'd listened for a moment, then smiled slightly. "Because they're my in-laws, and they're about to learn some things about assumptions." The third call was to his sommelier, a soft-spoken woman named Gabrielle who had an encyclopedic knowledge of wine and a gift for pairing flavors. "The Hartwell party on Christmas. I want you to select wines that will absolutely blow their minds. I don't care about the cost. This is personal. When he'd finished, he'd turn to me, his dark eyes serious. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" he'd asked, taking both my hands in his. "It's going to cause a scene. A big one. There's no coming back from it, no pretending it didn't happen. Once we do this, things are going to change permanently with your family." I'd thought about that question, really thought about it. Was I sure? Sure about confronting them publicly, about leveraging Daniel's ownership of the restaurant they'd chosen, about forcing them to see what they'd been so determined to overlook? Sure about potentially destroying whatever remained of my relationship with my parents, my brother, my sister? "Good," I'd said finally. "I'm tired of watching them hurt you. And honestly, Vic, I'm tired of pretending their approval matters. I'm tired of watching you make yourself smaller and quieter, trying to be acceptable to people who've decided you're not enough. We've been married for 3 years. In that entire time, they haven't invited me to a single family event. Not one. They've never asked about my restaurants, never acknowledged my success, never treated me like I'm anything more than a phase you're going through." He'd paused, his jaw tight with suppressed emotion. "You know what kills me? When we got married, my mom gave up her savings to help pay for the wedding. $8,000 she'd been saving for years. She gave it freely, joyfully, because she was happy for us. Your parents didn't contribute a single dollar and then left before the reception even started. That told me everything I needed to know about what I mean to your family. Which is nothing. I mean nothing to them." "You mean everything to me," I'd said, tears burning in my eyes. "I know. And that's why I'm willing to do this, to force this confrontation. Not for revenge, though I won't lie and say that's not part of it, but because you deserve better than what they're giving you. You deserve to be valued, to be respected, to have a family that celebrates your happiness instead of punishing you for it." I'd nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "So tomorrow night," he continued, "when they're sitting at my restaurant, at my chef's table, eating my food, being served by my staff, they're going to learn exactly what they've been dismissing. And you're going to be there to see their faces when they realize it." Over the next week, my phone became a weapon of psychological warfare for my family. The messages started almost immediately, as if they'd sensed some shift in the dynamic even though I hadn't responded to their Christmas dinner text. My mother called twice daily, leaving voicemails that progressed through a predictable emotional spectrum. December 19th, 2:34 p.m. "Victoria, darling, I know you're upset, but please don't be dramatic about this. This isn't personal. We're just trying to have a peaceful family holiday without any tension or conflict. You understand, don't you? Call me back so we can discuss this like adults." December 20th, 10:22 a.m. "Vicky, your father is asking why you haven't responded to our invitation. Well, to our explanation about Christmas. He's concerned that you're taking this the wrong way. We love you, sweetheart. This has nothing to do with you personally. It's just about keeping the gathering small and manageable. Please call me back." December 21st, 9:17 a.m. "Your father is quite hurt by your silence, Victoria. He doesn't understand why you're being so stubborn about this. It's one dinner. Surely you can spend one Christmas apart from Daniel. It's not like we're asking you to divorce him. We're just asking for one evening of family time. Is that really so unreasonable?" December 22nd, 6:18 p.m. "This is getting ridiculous, Victoria. You're a grown woman, not a teenager having a tantrum. If you can't be mature about our family traditions, perhaps it's best you're not attending anyway. We're trying to have a nice holiday, and you're making everything difficult as usual." December 23rd, 6:42 p.m. "I don't know what else to say to you. Your father and I have tried to be understanding, but you're being impossibly stubborn. If you can't respect our wishes for our own Christmas celebration, then I suppose that's your choice. Don't expect us to apologize for wanting a peaceful holiday." Christopher sent exactly one text, delivered on December 20th with the emotional depth of a business memo. Mom and Dad are trying their best. Stop being difficult. It's Christmas. When I didn't respond, he'd followed up 2 days later. Your silence is childish. Grow up. Isabel, at least, had the decency to call personally on December 21st, though her version of support was almost worse than Christopher's dismissiveness. I think they're being unfair, she'd admitted, her voice carrying that carefully modulated tone she used when discussing anything uncomfortable. But you know how they are about maintaining certain standards. Maybe if Daniel had gone to Yale instead of community college, or if his family background was more, I don't know, more aligned with ours, it would be different. Stop, I'd interrupted, feeling anger rise in my throat like bile. Just stop talking, Isabel. Do you hear yourself? Do you hear what you're saying? I'm trying to help, she'd protested. I'm trying to explain their perspective so you can understand where they're coming from. No, you're trying to make their cruelty more palatable. You're trying to find a way to excuse the inexcusable. There's a difference between understanding and enabling, and you've been enabling them for years. I'm in the middle here, Vicky. I'm trying to maintain a relationship with everyone. By standing for nothing, I'd cut her off. By watching them exclude me for 3 years and never once saying it was wrong. By coming to my wedding and then posting carefully worded Instagram captions that made it sound like my marriage was some brave alternative lifestyle choice that required your support. You're not in the middle, Isabel. You're on their side. You've always been on their side. You're just polite enough to pretend otherwise. She'd been quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you stood up for me? When was the last time you told them it was wrong to exclude Daniel? When was the last time you said, if Daniel's not invited, I'm not coming either? Never. The answer is never. Because standing up for me would cost you something, and you're not willing to pay that price. She'd hung up after that. I'd blocked her number, along with Christopher's, feeling lighter with each deletion from my contacts. Lauren had come over on December 24th, Christmas Eve, with wine and moral support and a fierce protective energy that made me grateful for chosen family. Last chance to back out, she'd said, settling onto my couch with a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon. Though I really hope you don't. I'm not backing out, I'd replied, curling up beside her. I'm done being the family embarrassment who apologizes for existing. If they want to exclude me, they're going to learn exactly what that means. What time is their reservation? She'd asked, and I'd seen the gleam in her eye that meant she was mentally preparing for battle. 7 o'clock. Prime seating at the chef's table. 7-course tasting menu with wine pairings. They paid $2,387 upfront for the experience. Lauren had let out a low whistle. They're really going all out for this exclusive family dinner without you. They always do, I'd said, taking a sip of wine. When I'm not invited, money is no object. My trust fund is too risky to release because Daniel might make poor financial decisions, but dropping $2,400 on one dinner to celebrate without me? That's just fine. The hypocrisy is breathtaking, Lauren had muttered. It really is. Christmas morning dawned cold and clear, the kind of crystalline winter day that makes New York look like a postcard. I woke up next to Daniel in our modest but warm apartment, morning light streaming through the windows that overlooked the street below. We made breakfast together. His specialty, ricotta pancakes with lemon zest and fresh berries that he'd picked up from the farmer's market the day before. The kitchen smelled like butter and citrus and possibility. We opened presents at our small kitchen table, just the two of us. He'd gotten me first edition copies of my favorite novels, Fitzgerald, Steinbeck, Toni Morrison, carefully wrapped and annotated with small notes in his handwriting about why he'd chosen each one. Because you made me love reading, one note said. Because you see beauty in broken people, said another. I'd gotten him the professional knife set he'd been eyeing for months, Japanese steel that cost more than our monthly rent but which I knew he'd use every day, that would become an extension of his hands in the kitchen. We didn't talk about the evening ahead, not yet. We existed in the peaceful morning, in the quiet joy of being together, of having built something good despite everything that had tried to tear us apart. At 5:30 p.m., Daniel left for the restaurant to prepare. He kissed me goodbye at the door, his hands framing my face. "You ready for tonight?" he'd asked, searching my eyes for any hesitation. Terrified, I'd admitted. "But yes, more ready than I've ever been." "We can still cancel the plan," he'd offered one last time. "Just let them have their dinner, let it go, walk away from all of it." "No," I'd interrupted firmly. "I've spent 5 years letting them have their way. 5 years making myself smaller, quieter, more acceptable, hoping they'd finally see me. Tonight, they learn that actions have consequences. Tonight, they learn that I'm done apologizing for choosing love." He'd nodded, pride and protectiveness warring in his expression. "I love you, Victoria and Hartwell. I love you, Daniel James Martinez." He left, and I was alone with my thoughts and my racing heart and the careful preparations I'd made. I stayed home, supposedly. That was the story my family believed, that I was sulking in my apartment, excluded and defeated, probably crying into my pillow while they celebrated without me. They had no idea I'd be arriving at Belmont's at exactly 7:15 p.m., after they'd been seated and served their first course. They had no idea what was waiting for them. At 6:47 p.m., right on schedule, my mother texted a photo to the family group chat, the one I was still part of, though I'd muted the notifications weeks ago. I unmuted it just to see the photo. A beautifully set table at Belmont's, champagne flutes gleaming under soft Edison bulb lighting, with the caption "Perfect evening with my favorite people, Red Heart." I studied the photo with detached curiosity. My father at the head of the table, looking distinguished in what I recognized as his Tom Ford suit. Christopher and Amanda to his right, both dressed in what looked like designer holiday attire. My mother and Isabel to his left, my mother in emerald silk and Isabel in vintage Chanel. 5 place settings. 5 champagne glasses filled with what looked like vintage Dom Perignon. 0 acknowledgement of my absence, as if the table was complete, as if nothing was missing. I took a screenshot, adding it to the folder on my laptop labeled Evidence, a collection I'd been building meticulously for 3 years. Inside were photos of family gatherings I wasn't invited to, screenshots of texts explicitly excluding me or Daniel, the trust fund delay documents with my father's signature, the wedding photos showing the conspicuously empty seats on my side of the venue. Every piece of proof that this wasn't in my head, wasn't me being dramatic or oversensitive, wasn't a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with better communication. It was systematic. It was deliberate. It was documented. At 7 p.m., I got a text from Daniel. "They've been seated. Champagne poured. First course in 10 minutes. Chef's amuse-bouche, those compressed watermelon cubes with feta and mint you love. You sure about this?" "On my way," I typed back, my fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I dressed carefully for this moment. Not too formal, that would seem like I was trying too hard, like I needed their validation enough to dress up for the confrontation. But elegant enough to make it clear I hadn't spent the day crying into my pillow or drowning my sorrows in cheap wine and self-pity. A simple black cocktail dress, the Mikimoto pearl earrings Daniel had given me for our 2nd anniversary, black heels that made me feel powerful, pulled together, ready for battle. Lauren drove me in her Subaru Outback, refusing to let me take a cab or the subway. "This is either the bravest or craziest thing you've ever done," she said as we pulled up to Belmont's valet station, the restaurant glowing warmly in the December darkness. "Probably both," I admitted, checking my lipstick in the visor mirror one last time. "For what it's worth, I'm incredibly proud of you. And I can't wait to see their faces." The restaurant was beautiful. Daniel's vision fully realized in exposed brick and Edison lighting and an open kitchen where chefs moved like choreographed dancers. The Christmas decorations were subtle and elegant, White roses, candles, tiny lights woven through garland. The hostess stand was positioned near the entrance, and Maria, the head hostess who'd become a friend over the years, greeted me with a knowing smile. "Table 12?" she asked quietly, her dark eyes warm with conspiratorial glee. "Table 12, I confirmed. She led me through the main dining room, past other diners enjoying their Christmas dinners, couples and families who had no idea they were about to witness something extraordinary. The restaurant had a low hum of conversation and clinking silverware, jazz playing softly through the speakers, the scent of garlic and herbs and expensive wine. I could see them now, my family, seated at the chef's table in the semi-private alcove Daniel had designed specifically for VIP guests. The space was separated from the main dining room by a decorative screen that provided some privacy while still allowing a view of the kitchen. They were laughing, relaxed, champagne glasses raised in some toast I couldn't hear from this distance. Christopher was gesturing animatedly, probably telling a story from work. Amanda looked elegant and bored, checking her phone with practiced subtlety. Isabel was taking photos of her food, because of course she was. I positioned myself at the bar with a clear sight line to their table, settling onto a leather stool. From here, I could watch everything unfold without being immediately visible to them. The bartender, a young man named Connor who'd worked at Daniel's restaurants for 2 years, gave me a subtle nod of recognition. "Can I get you anything?" he asked. "Sparkling water for now," I said. "I want to keep a clear head." The first course arrived at their table right on schedule. Seared scallops with brown butter, capers, and microgreens arranged artfully on white china. My father examined his plate like a food critic, turning it slightly to appreciate the presentation. Christopher took a photo for Instagram, because apparently documenting your exclusive family dinner was more important than actually experiencing it. My mother dabbed her lips delicately with her napkin before taking her first bite, her movements practiced and precise. "Exquisite," I heard her say, her voice carrying across the space. "The scallops are absolutely divine." Then Daniel appeared from the kitchen, and my heart clenched with love and nervousness and anticipation. He was in full chef's whites, immaculate and professional, his name embroidered subtly on the breast pocket in navy thread. He looked authoritative, commanding, completely in control of his domain. He approached their table with a serving tray, his expression perfectly neutral, the consummate professional. "Good evening," he said, his voice carrying just enough for me to hear clearly from my position at the bar. "Chef Daniel Martinez. I'll be personally overseeing your tasting menu this evening." My mother looked up with that practiced smile she reserved for service staff, warm enough to seem polite, distant enough to maintain the boundary between classes. "How lovely," she said in that particular tone. "The scallops are divine. Our compliments to the kitchen." "I'm glad you're enjoying them," Daniel replied smoothly, his professionalism impeccable. "For your second course, we have a winter vegetable veloute with truffle oil and crispy prosciutto. The vegetables are sourced from a farm in the Hudson Valley that we work with exclusively." "Actually," my father interrupted, leaning back in his chair with the casual entitlement of someone accustomed to being catered to, "could you recommend a wine pairing? The champagne is adequate, but I'm thinking something with more complexity for the main courses. Perhaps a Burgundy. I'm partial to the 2015 vintage." "Of course, sir," Daniel said, his tone respectful but with something underneath that I recognized, a careful control. "I'd be happy to discuss our wine selection with you. We have an excellent Gevrey Chambertin from 2016 that would pair beautifully with the duck breast in your 5th course." Christopher leaned back in his chair, swirling his champagne with affected sophistication. "You're the chef and the sommelier? Multi-talented." His tone suggested this was unusual, slightly amusing, perhaps not entirely professional. "I'm also the owner," Daniel said calmly, setting down the serving tray with deliberate precision. "I like to personally attend to our most important reservations." The word important hung in the air for exactly 3 seconds before comprehension began to dawn. My mother's smile faltered slightly, confusion flickering across her carefully maintained expression. Isabel looked up from her phone for the first time, her artist's eye noting something off in the interaction.
The owner.
Christopher repeated, his casual lean forward now, his attention fully engaged.
Of Belmont's.
I purchased it 6 months ago, Daniel confirmed, his voice still professionally neutral but with an edge now, a sharpness creeping in. Along with 3 other restaurants in the city. But Belmont's is my flagship. My pride and joy. I've invested considerable time and resources into making it one of the finest dining experiences in Manhattan. My father's expression shifted from polite interest to confused scrutiny, his legal mind clearly trying to piece together information that didn't fit his preconceptions. Martinez, you said? That name sounds familiar somehow.
It should, Daniel replied, his voice still perfectly professional but the words carrying weight now.
I'm married to your daughter, Victoria. Though I wouldn't expect you to remember that detail since you've never once asked about my work, my name, my restaurants, or frankly, anything about me in the 5 years we've known each other. In 5 years, you've never asked a single question about my life beyond dismissive comments about the restaurant business being risky. The silence that fell over table 12 was absolute, crystalline, the kind of silence that seems to have weight and texture. Forks stopped mid-air, suspended in shock. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. My mother's face drained of all color, going from carefully maintained tan to pale in seconds. Amanda's mouth literally dropped open, her usual composure shattered. That's when I stood up from the bar and walked toward them, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor with each deliberate step. Every eye in the restaurant seemed to turn toward me, sensing drama, scenting confrontation. "Hello, family," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, despite the adrenaline making my fingers tingle. "Enjoying your immediate family dinner?" My mother actually gasped, her hand flying to her throat in a gesture of shock. My father's jaw literally dropped open, his usually controlled expression completely gone. Christopher's face turned an impressive shade of red, starting at his collar and spreading upward. Isabel looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor.
"Victoria," my mother managed, her voice strangled and thin.
"What are you doing here?
How did you?"
"Well, my husband owns the restaurant," I replied, deliberately emphasizing the word husband, making sure it landed with full force. "The restaurant where you made a reservation for your exclusive family Christmas dinner. The restaurant you chose specifically because it's elegant and expensive and exclusive. And I figured since I wasn't welcome at the family table, I'd at least come see what I was missing. Come see what a $2,387 dinner without me looks like." This is inappropriate," my father stammered, and the fact that Richard Hartwell III was stammering told me just how completely we'd upended his expectations. "You shouldn't be, this is a private family dinner."
"Can't just what?"
I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Can't just show up at my husband's restaurant? Can't just exist in the same space as your immediate family? Can't just demand to be treated with basic human dignity and respect?"
Daniel moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine in a gesture that was subtle but unmistakable.
United front. Equals. Partners. Everything my family had refused to acknowledge for 5 years. "You lied to us," Christopher accused, his finger pointing at Daniel in that aggressive lawyer way he'd perfected.
"You said you were the chef serving our table."
"I said I was Chef Daniel Martinez," Daniel corrected calmly, his voice level despite the accusation. "Which is accurate. I am the chef. I trained in professional kitchens for 15 years. I'm also the owner. You simply made assumptions based on your preconceptions about who I am and what I'm capable of." Isabel found her voice, though it came out weaker than her usual artistic confidence. "This is so manipulative, Vicky. Setting up this whole scene, ambushing us at dinner. Like excluding your sister from Christmas dinner?" Lauren's voice came from behind me. She'd followed me and despite my protests, unable to resist witnessing the confrontation, unable to let me face them alone. Let's talk about manipulation. Let's talk about systematically excluding someone from family events for 3 years. Let's talk about using trust funds as leverage to control your daughter's life choices. My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Several other diners glanced over, curiosity piqued by the rising tension. "Victoria, this is humiliating," she hissed, her voice low but intense. "You've made your point. Can we please discuss this privately, away from all these people?" "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious about her answer. "You had no problem excluding me publicly. In a group text message that included everyone except me. You had no problem posting photos of family gatherings I wasn't invited to on social media for all your country club friends to see. Why should this conversation be private?" "Because we're your family," my father said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone that had cowed me for 29 years, the tone that expected immediate compliance and unquestioning respect. "Are you?" The question came out quieter than I'd intended, but with more force, more weight than any shouting could have carried. "Because real family doesn't require you to earn basic respect. Family doesn't make you beg for invitations to holiday dinners. Family doesn't punish you for choosing love over social status. Family doesn't erase your spouse from every gathering and then act surprised when you stop showing up." I pulled out my phone, opening the carefully organized folder I'd maintained for 3 years. "Want to know what I've been doing instead of attending your exclusive family events? Documenting every single exclusion." I held up my phone so they could all see, swiping through the images slowly, deliberately. Christmas 2020. Easter 2021. Thanksgiving 2021. Your anniversary party in July. Christopher's partnership celebration. Isabel's gallery opening in Soho. Dad's birthday dinner. Mom's garden club awards ceremony. 14 major family events over 3 years. 14 separate occasions where I wasn't invited because my husband wasn't suitable for your standards. "We never said he wasn't suitable," my mother protested weakly, but her voice lacked conviction. "You didn't have to say it explicitly, Mother," I replied, my voice sharp. "You said it every time you scheduled events at members-only clubs where he couldn't be added to the reservation. Every time you cited immediate family-only policies that somehow never applied when Christopher brought Amanda or Isabel brought her rotating roster of boyfriends. Every time you looked at his clothes, his car, his community college degree with barely disguised contempt. Maybe if you hadn't been so defensive about him from the start," Amanda began, speaking up for the first time. "Don't," I cut her off sharply, turning to face my sister-in-law. "Just don't. You've been part of this family for 6 years and you never once questioned why I was consistently excluded. You participated in every single one of these events, smiled in every photo, and never once said, 'Hey, where's Victoria? Why isn't Daniel invited?' You were complicit in this, Amanda. You don't get to play neutral observer now." Daniel squeezed my hand, grounding me, reminding me to breathe. I took a moment, collecting myself, preparing for what came next. "Do you want to know what else I documented?" I asked, my voice quieter now but no less intense. "The trust fund situation. I have emails from the estate lawyer, explaining in detail how Dad used his trustee discretion to delay my distribution indefinitely due to my questionable financial judgment. Christopher got his $247,680 trust fund distribution at 30, no questions asked. Isabel will get her $253,200 in 6 months when she turns 30. But mine has been frozen for 18 months because I married someone you consider beneath our family standards." My father's face turned purple, that dangerous shade that meant his blood pressure was spiking. "That money is being protected for your own good, Victoria." "It's being used as leverage," I interrupted, my voice firm. "As punishment. As a way to maintain control over my life because you can't accept that I made choices you didn't approve of. That I chose happiness and love over status and money.
That I chose Daniel.
I turned to Christopher, making direct eye contact.
You called my marriage a phase. Do you remember that?
In March, on the phone when I asked you about the trust fund.
You said Mom and Dad shouldn't have to enable my phase.
A phase. Like my marriage was teenage rebellion or a dietary experiment, something I'd grow out of if everyone just waited patiently enough.
Christopher had the decency to look uncomfortable, shifting in his seat.
I was trying to help, to make you see reason, to understand their perspective.
Reason.
I laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. What's reasonable about demanding I choose between my husband and my family? What's reasonable about erasing my spouse from every family occasion for 3 years? What's reasonable about treating a successful entrepreneur like he's contaminated because he didn't go to Yale? Because his mother cleaned houses to support her family instead of hosting charity galas? The nearby tables had definitely noticed the confrontation now. I could see other diners trying not to stare while simultaneously not wanting to miss a moment. Several people had their phones out, though whether they were recording or just texting about the drama, I couldn't tell.
Maria, the hostess, hovered nearby, clearly uncertain whether to intervene.
But Daniel caught her eye and gave a subtle shake of his head.
Let it play out. Let them hear it all.
I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed spreadsheet I'd prepared, pages I'd spent hours compiling and organizing.
I'm a teacher, I said, laying the document on their table right next to the half-eaten scallops and the expensive champagne.
So I appreciate good data. Clear numbers. Documented evidence. This is a breakdown of every family event over the past 3 years, the 47 separate occasions where you gathered as a family. I pointed to the columns, my finger tracing the data. Column A, event name and date, everything from major holidays to casual Sunday brunches. Column B, whether Daniel and I were invited, yes or no, very simple. Column C, whether we actually attended when invited. Column D, your stated reason for our exclusion when you bothered to give one. Christopher picked up the spreadsheet with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the columns. I watched his expression shift from defensive to something that might have been shame as the sheer volume of exclusions became impossible to deny. Out of 47 family gatherings, and yes, I counted every single one, verified every date, saved every text message and email, we were invited to exactly 8. We attended 6 of those before I realized the pattern and stopped subjecting myself to events where I was merely tolerated rather than welcomed. That means 39 times you deliberately chose to celebrate without your daughter. 39 times you proved that blood relation means nothing if I don't meet your standards of acceptability. I pulled out another document, this one more painful. But wait, there's more. Because I'm thorough, I also tracked the financial dimension. Remember how you were so concerned about protecting my trust fund from Daniel's risky business ventures? Let me tell you about those risky ventures. I laid out another printed sheet. Harvest, Daniel's first restaurant, purchased in 2018 for $342,000. Current valuation, $1.2 million. Profit margin last year, 23%. Birch, his second restaurant, purchased in 2019 for $567,000. Current valuation, $1.8 million. Profit margin, 27%. Salt and Stone, his third restaurant, purchased in 2020 for $890,000. Current valuation, $2.1 million. Profit margin, 31%. I paused, letting the numbers sink in. And Belmont's, the restaurant where you're currently sitting, enjoying your $2,387 Christmas dinner, purchased 6 months ago for $3.2 million. Current valuation after Daniel's renovations and menu changes, $5.7 million. Projected profit margin for this year, 38%. My father's face had gone from purple to pale, the color draining as he processed the financial information. His entire career had been built on numbers, on valuation, on assessing worth. Daniel's risky restaurant empire is currently valued at approximately $10.8 million, I continued, my voice steady. His personal net worth, accounting for debt and operating expenses, is approximately $4.3 million. But please, Father, do continue to protect my $250,000 trust fund from his questionable financial judgment. The silence was deafening. Even the nearby tables had gone quiet, everyone within earshot transfixed by the confrontation unfolding. Isabel was crying now, silent tears running down her perfectly made-up face, leaving tracks through her expensive foundation. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh my God, Vicky, I didn't realize. I thought you were being dramatic about the exclusions. But looking at this data, seeing it all laid out like this."
47 events, I repeated, my own voice threatening to break.
47 times you proved that I don't matter. That my choices are wrong. That my husband isn't worthy of your time or attention or basic human courtesy. My mother reached for my hand across the table. I stepped back, deliberately out of range. "Don't," I said firmly. "Don't touch me and pretend this is a misunderstanding. Don't act like this was some accidental pattern of behavior that you didn't notice. You made a choice. Repeatedly. Deliberately. 4 years. You chose your social status and your country club friends and your outdated ideas about appropriate marriage partners over your own daughter's happiness. We're your parents," she said, tears forming in her own eyes now. "We love you, Victoria.
We've always loved you." "No," I replied, my voice firm despite the tears threatening to spill from my own eyes.
"Love doesn't require someone to shrink themselves to fit your expectations. Love doesn't exclude and humiliate. Love doesn't make acceptance conditional on erasing the person who makes you happiest. What you've shown me isn't love. It's control. It's manipulation. It's conditional approval that disappears the moment I don't conform to your vision of who I should be." I felt Daniel's hand on my lower back, steadying me, his presence a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. Lauren stood close by, my witness and my ally, the sister I'd chosen rather than the one I'd been born with. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice stronger now, drawing on every ounce of authority I'd ever needed as a teacher facing down a classroom full of difficult teenagers. "You're going to finish your very expensive Christmas dinner. Daniel's staff will continue to provide excellent service because that's what they do. They're professionals who take pride in their work. And then you're going to leave. And you're not going to contact me again unless you're ready to have a real conversation about respect and boundaries and what it actually means to be family."
"Victoria, please," my father started, his voice carrying a note of desperation I'd never heard before.
"I'm not finished," I interrupted, channeling every bit of backbone I developed over 3 years of systematic exclusion. "You will not guilt me, gaslight me, or manipulate me anymore. You will not use money as leverage to control my choices. You will not exclude my husband from family events and expect me to show up alone and grateful. You will not treat my marriage as some embarrassing phase that you're patiently waiting for me to outgrow so I can come back and marry someone appropriate." I picked up my phone and took a deliberate photo of their shocked faces, the flash making them blink. "For my documentation," I explained calmly. "In case you later claim this conversation never happened or try to rewrite history to make me the villain. I've learned to protect myself with evidence." Christopher stood up suddenly, his napkin falling to the floor. His expression was difficult to read. Shock, shame, anger, confusion all warring for dominance.
"Vic," he said slowly, I
think we owe you an apology. A real one. Not right now, not like this, but you're right. About all of it.
I've been complicit in excluding you, in dismissing Daniel, in treating your marriage like it was less important than mine simply because Amanda came from the right kind of family."
It was perhaps the first genuine thing he'd said to me in 5 years. I nodded slowly, carefully. "Then prove it, Christopher. Through actions, not words." Through consistent behavior over time, not a single apology offered in the heat of confrontation. Isabel was fully sobbing now, her carefully curated artistic composure completely shattered. "I've been such an asshole," she managed between sobs. "Such a terrible sister. Oh my God, Vicky, I'm so sorry. I participated in every single one of these exclusions. I smiled in all the photos. I never once stood up for you or Daniel. I just went along with it because it was easier than confronting Mom and Dad." My mother just sat there, her perfect composure completely shattered, mascara starting to run from tears she couldn't quite hold back. My father stared at the spreadsheet like it contained information he couldn't quite process, his legal mind trying to find a loophole, an argument, some way to reframe the data that didn't make him the villain. "Enjoy your meal," I said finally, gathering my phone and my dignity. "I hope the duck breast is exceptional. I hope the wine pairing is perfect. I hope every course is exquisite. And I hope you think about the cost of this dinner, not in dollars, but in the daughter you've been systematically pushing away for 3 years. Merry Christmas, family." Daniel and I turned to leave, walking together toward the exit with Lauren following close behind. As we passed through the dining room, I heard my father's voice, very quiet but carrying in the stunned silence we'd left behind. Did we do all those things to her?" I didn't turn back. I'd said everything that needed saying. There was nothing left but to walk away. In the car, parked just outside the restaurant, reactions set in hard and fast. My hands shook so badly Daniel had to help with my seatbelt, his fingers steady and warm against my trembling ones. "Holy shit," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Did that actually just happen? Did I actually confront my entire family in a public restaurant on Christmas? "That actually just happened," Daniel confirmed, pulling me into his arms across the center console. "And you were absolutely magnificent. Powerful and clear and completely justified in everything you said." "I feel like I'm going to throw up," I admitted, my stomach churning with adrenaline and delayed fear and the weight of what I'd just done. "All so normal," Lauren said from the back seat, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "For what it's worth, I got everything on video. Just in case they try to claim it happened differently or that you were hysterical or unreasonable." My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Text after text, messages piling up so fast the notifications blurred together. "Christopher, 8:47 p.m. We need to talk. Really talk. Not tonight. Clearly everyone needs space, but soon. I'm sorry, Vic. I mean that. I'm genuinely sorry for how I've treated you and Daniel." Isabel, 8:51 p.m. I don't expect you to forgive me and I don't deserve it, but I need you to know I see it now. I see how awful we've been. How awful I've been. I'm so sorry. I'm going to do better. I'm going to be better. Amanda, 8:53 p.m. Christopher showed me your spreadsheet. All 47 events laid out with dates and reasons. I'm horrified. I'm ashamed. You deserved so much better from all of us. From me especially, because I should have noticed and said something. My mother, 9:02 p.m. Please call me when you're ready. When you can. We need to discuss this as a family. I had no idea. I didn't realize how much we'd hurt you. Please. My father, 9:15 p.m. Your trust fund will be released in full by end of week. Wire transfer, no conditions, no strings. This was never about protecting you. You were right about that. You were right about everything. I read the messages aloud to Daniel and Lauren, my voice shaking. What do I do with these? I asked. Do I respond? Do I engage? Do I? Nothing tonight, Daniel advised gently, taking the phone from my trembling hands. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow we figure out what kind of relationship, if any, you want with them going forward. But tonight you just breathe. You did something incredibly brave. You stood up for yourself, for us, for your worth. That's enough for now. But even as he said it, even as Lauren agreed from the back seat, I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. The relief I felt at finally speaking my truth was overwhelming, a weight lifting that I hadn't fully realized I was carrying. For 5 years, I'd been trying to earn something that should have been freely given. For 5 years, I'd made myself smaller, quieter, more apologetic, more accommodating, hoping that eventually they'd love me enough to include my husband, to accept my choices, to treat me like I mattered. Now, sitting in the car outside the restaurant Daniel had built with his own hands and brilliant mind and relentless work ethic, I realized I'd been asking the wrong question all along. It was never about whether they would accept Daniel. It was about whether I would accept being treated as less than by people who claimed to love me. The answer was clear: no. Not anymore. Never again. Over the next week, the messages continued in a steady stream. My mother called 14 times, each voicemail more emotional than the last, ranging from defensive to apologetic to desperately pleading. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses or her justifications or her carefully crafted explanations for why they'd done what they'd done. Christopher sent a 5-page email on December 27th, arriving at 2:13 a.m., clearly written during a bout of insomnia. He detailed every moment he remembered excluding us, taking full responsibility for his complicity, his dismissiveness, his failure as a brother. I've been thinking about why we treated you this way, he wrote in the third paragraph. And I think we were invested in a narrative about our family that required you to make a certain kind of choice. When you didn't, when you chose Daniel and happiness over status and approval, it broke the story we'd been telling ourselves about who we are. So we erased you from the story entirely. Which is unforgivable. Isabel, true to her artistic nature, expressed herself through action rather than just words. On December 28th, a large package arrived at our apartment. Inside was a painting she'd created, Daniel and me from our wedding photo, the one where we're laughing, genuinely happy, caught in a moment of pure joy. She'd painted us larger than life, vibrant and alive, surrounded by light. It was beautiful and honest, and everything her previous carefully filtered Instagram posts about our wedding hadn't been. The painting came with a note in her distinctive handwriting: I should have celebrated this from day one. I should have fought for you, stood up for you, made it clear that excluding Daniel meant excluding me too. I'm sorry I didn't. I'm sorry I participated in erasing your happiness because it was easier than confronting Mom and Dad. You deserved a sister who fought for you. I'm going to try to be that person now, if you'll let me. On December 31st, New Year's Eve, I finally responded to Christopher's email. Not with forgiveness, exactly, that would take time and consistent changed behavior, not just words, but with a willingness to have a conversation, to see if the relationship could be rebuilt on better foundations. We met for coffee on January 4th at a neutral location, a small cafe in the village that neither of us had been to before. No history, no associations, no loaded memories. Christopher looked tired, older somehow, like the past week had aged him. He'd lost weight, and there were circles under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping well. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said when we sat down with our coffees, his hands wrapped around his mug like he needed the warmth. About why we treated you that way. About what it says about us as a family. And I think we were invested in a very specific narrative about our family that required everyone to play their assigned role. Dad as the successful attorney, Mom as the society matron, me as the prodigy son following in his footsteps, Isabel as the artistic free spirit who added color to our otherwise corporate existence. And what was my role? I asked, genuinely curious about his analysis. You were supposed to marry well, he said bluntly. Someone from Yale or Princeton, someone whose family we already knew from the club, someone who would fit seamlessly into the existing structure. When you didn't, when you chose Daniel and genuine love over strategic alliance, it didn't fit the narrative. So rather than adjusting the story, we erased you from it. That's a very analytical way of describing systematic exclusion and emotional abuse, I observed. I know,
he said, meeting my eyes.
I'm a lawyer. I analyze things to avoid feeling them. But I am feeling this, Vic. I'm ashamed. I'm horrified at myself. And I don't expect forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I just want you to know I see it now.
And I'm going to do better.
Actions, not words, I reminded him, echoing what I'd said at the restaurant. Actions, he agreed firmly. Starting with this, I told Mom and Dad that if they ever exclude you or Daniel again, Amanda and I won't attend either. Period. No exceptions. No explanations. Isabel said the same thing. We're done participating in your erasure. It was something. Not everything, but something. A foundation we might build on. 6 months later, I'm writing this from the deck of our new house, a beautiful 3-bedroom Craftsman in Astoria that we bought with my trust fund money, released in full exactly when my father promised, and Daniel's restaurant profits combined. It's modest by my family's standards, but feels like a mansion to us, with a real kitchen where Daniel can cook and a study where I can grade papers and write, maybe finally work on that novel I've been thinking about for years. My relationship with my family is complicated, still healing, still finding its shape. We have dinner occasionally, always including Daniel, always with better boundaries clearly established and maintained. It's not perfect. Sometimes old patterns try to reassert themselves. But there's growth, genuine effort, consistent change. My mother and I are in therapy together, meeting every other week with a family therapist who specializes in adult relationships and boundary work. It's painful and necessary and slowly helping us understand each other better. In one session, my mother admitted that she'd seen Daniel as a threat to her vision of who I should be, and rather than adjusting her vision, she tried to pretend he didn't exist. I thought if I just didn't acknowledge him, you'd eventually see reason and leave him, she confessed, crying. I didn't understand that I was the one who needed to see reason. My father admitted, in a rare moment of vulnerability during a private conversation at his office, that he'd projected his own class insecurities onto my marriage. My father, your grandfather, was a carpenter, he'd said, staring out his office window at the Manhattan skyline. He built houses with his hands. I spent my whole life trying to rise above that, to prove I was more than a workman's son. When you married Daniel, someone who works in restaurants, who didn't go to an Ivy League school, I saw it as you rejecting everything I'd built, everything I'd achieved. It wasn't rational. It wasn't fair to you. But it was how I felt. Christopher and Amanda have become genuine allies, hosting dinners where Daniel and I are the guests of honor rather than tolerated additions. Christopher has started asking Daniel for business advice, genuinely interested in his approach to expansion and scaling. They've developed an unlikely friendship built on mutual respect. Isabel and I talk weekly, rebuilding a sisterly relationship that had been performative rather than genuine. She's painting again, and several of her recent pieces feature themes of family and belonging and chosen relationships. Her latest show, titled Blood and Water, explored the question of what makes family real, genetics or choice, obligation or love. The paintings she creates now often feature our whole family, but different than before. Not the carefully curated Christmas card version, but something more honest. Daniel included, central rather than peripheral. Me not smiling if I don't feel like smiling. All of us with our flaws visible, our humanity acknowledged. But here's what I learned through all of this. You cannot love someone into respecting you. You cannot sacrifice enough of yourself to earn basic decency from people determined to withhold it. You cannot shrink yourself small enough to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold you. And family, real family, is built on mutual respect and genuine care, not blood relation alone. Daniel's restaurants continue to thrive and multiply. We're opening a 5th location next month, a sustainable seafood place in Brooklyn that's already generating buzz in the food media. My teaching career has flourished. I was promoted to department chair last month, and I'm finally working on that novel, writing late at night after Daniel comes home from the restaurants, the two of us working side by side in comfortable silence. Every morning, I wake up next to someone who has never once asked me to be anyone other than who I am, who sees my worth without needing spreadsheets or documentation, who built an empire from nothing and still treats the dishwasher with the same respect he shows the food critics, who stood beside me in that restaurant and backed every word I said without hesitation. That Christmas dinner confrontation wasn't the end of my family relationships. It was the end of accepting crumbs when I deserved a seat at the table. It was the end of apologizing for choosing love. It was the end of shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold me. Some people think I was too harsh, too dramatic, too public in my confrontation. They say family deserves endless chances, infinite patience, unconditional forgiveness. But I say this, family earns the title through actions, not genetics. Family is built through consistent care, not biological accident. And that night at Belmont's, I finally stopped auditioning for a role I should have had automatically. The truth is, I didn't lose my family that Christmas. I found my worth. I claimed my dignity. I drew boundaries that protected my peace and my marriage and my future. And sometimes, that's the greatest gift you can give yourself. The permission to require respect, to expect basic decency, to walk away from people who refuse to see your value. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who refused to accept your choices? Have you been excluded from gatherings because you didn't fit their expectations? Have you had to choose between your own happiness and your family's approval? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience matters. Your pain is valid. Your choices deserve respect. And if this resonated with you, if you felt this exclusion or this pressure or this impossible choice between being yourself and being accepted, don't forget to subscribe. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with the people who should love you unconditionally. But setting them anyway, standing firm in your worth, refusing to accept less than you deserve, that's not cruelty. That's not selfishness. That's survival. That's self-respect. That's how you reclaim your life from people who've been writing your story without your permission. The greatest act of love isn't always forgiveness. Sometimes it's the refusal to keep accepting the unacceptable. Sometimes it's saying no. Sometimes it's walking away. Sometimes it's serving their Christmas dinner and revealing exactly what they've been too blind to see. And sometimes, the family you choose is worth more than the family you were born into. Sometimes the greatest gift is simply permission to be yourself, fully and unapologetically, with someone who loves you not despite your choices but because of them. That's what I found when I stopped trying to earn my family's approval and started building my own life on my own terms. That's what I discovered when the waiter serving their exclusive dinner announced he was my husband. Not revenge, though I won't lie and say that sweetness wasn't part of it. But something better, freedom.